Okay, I'm going to do a time and cost analysis for the canvas stretcher frame job. I assembled 250 of these frames, processing 31 sheets of plywood, and the process starts with ordering the materials, which I had delivered last winter. I bought 2 bunks of 3/4 inch poplar plywood from Home Depot, and I paid about $60 for them to deliver it, which saves a considerable amount of time if you think about how much effort it would take to hand load and transport all of these sheets. It's definitely worthwhile to pay the $60 to have all that dropped off at your front door. So the first step is to generate a cut list and organize all the parts. This takes about 30 minutes, and after that I start processing all of the plywood parts. I'm using a helper with this step, so I'm doing all of the cross cuts, and the helper is on the outfeed restacking all the parts as they come off the saw. And I do all the cross cuts first, and then I re-rip all of those in half to make the sheets more manageable. And at that point I put the power feeder on my table saw, and I recut all of those sheets into strips that are 2 inches or 2 1/4 inches wide. And again, the outfeed helper is restacking all of those parts. Here I have the table saw set at a 30-degree bevel, and so I'm re-ripping some of those strips in half again at a bevel, and that makes the outer edge of the frame. So next I'm going to transport the power feeder onto my custom-made router table. So this machine operates 2 router heads simultaneously, and that's rounding over all of those edges in one pass. The dust collection on this machine is very efficient, so I don't have to wear a dust mask. So at this point it takes about 8 hours for 2 people to process all of these parts. We actually spread it out over 3 days just because the work is strenuous and repetitious, but if we had to, it would be possible to do it in 1 day. So the next step here is to do the chop saw miter cuts on the long edges first. And I'm using my GoPro camera to count the number of parts that I can process in a given amount of time to give me a rate of production. And then I'm going to do the assembly on these long edges first. So I'm using wood glue and 1 1/4 narrow crown staples to put all of these parts together ahead of time, and then I restack all of these parts and get ready for the next assembly step. So here I'm cutting the shorter edges on the miter saw, and I'm actually doing 2 different sizes. I do one size that fits the best, and then I do another that's maybe a 1/16 of an inch shorter, just because there is some variation in how those frames go together. So by making 2 different stacks of 2 different sizes of parts, I can kind of streamline getting the best fit. So here I'm assembling the frame together in one final step. I'm using a polyurethane construction adhesive on those butt joints, and then I'm putting the shorter edge on with glue and staples again. And I stack about 5 frames together to make one bundle, and it takes me 15 to 17 minutes per bundle. Here I have a carriage that I constructed to transport these frames in my pickup truck. I do a double stack of frames to maximize my load, and this helps stabilize it. So I'm going to transport these myself. Sometimes I hire somebody to make the trip in one load, but if I do it this way I can save about $400. Sometimes I do it in one, but I didn't want to overload my pickup truck because it's a rental, so I'm actually going to make 2 trips this time. And here they are, delivered to SUNY New Paltz in New Paltz, New York. So now I'm ready to go back and do it all over again. So here are my results for this production run. I added up all of the times for each of these steps and came up with a number of about 40 hours. So it takes about a full 40-hour work week to produce this. And that number was actually a lot lower than I anticipated. It definitely felt like 2 weeks, but that's just because I can't work continuously. I can maybe do 4 hours of this kind of work per day, and then I have to fill up the time doing something else. I actually have some tendonitis in my left wrist and my right elbow that I have to be careful with, so I can't overdo it, and that's one of the drawbacks of this kind of work. So on an individual frame basis, it takes about 9.6 minutes, or just under 10 minutes of labor to produce each one of these frames in a production setting. And my materials that I came up with was about $1,400, including all of the fasteners. So the final result, given a selling price of $24 each, I make a profit margin of $4,600, which works out to be $115 an hour, which seems like a pretty good number, but considering I had a hard time even making $50 an hour when I first started making these, that was way back before I had a power feeder on my table saw. I was doing all of this feeding manually and just using a bucket on the outfeed, and then or making a big mess on the floor and then restacking the parts. So I used to do all of this work myself without any power feed, and I didn't have the router table either. I built that maybe 4 years ago, and before I had this machine I was doing all of the sanding after the frame was assembled. So I was just using an orbital sander on the top and bottom edge, and that was creating a big mess and taking up an extra 2 minutes per frame. And I also made this assembly jig on my workbench, and I used the polyurethane adhesive on these butt joints. Before I was using pocket hole screws, so doing it this way eliminates cutting pocket hole screws and assembling with the screws, and it actually saves quite a bit in hardware too. It would cost me about $40 in pocket hole screws to make these frames that way. So substituting that with a tube of construction adhesive that costs about $6 saves a considerable amount of money, but it does save 2 steps out of the process. So given all of that, with the power feeders, the power feed router table, and the more efficient assembly method, I was able to more than double my production rate for this same product without depreciating anything in quality. In fact, the quality is probably a little bit better now because the router table does a better job at easing those edges than sanding it by hand. So all I have to do is sand these corners, which only takes maybe 30 seconds at the most, and it makes quick work of a messy job. So this is just an example of how to take a process and improve it to increase your production and efficiency and profitability. And so I was able to make a lot more money doing less work with this product, and that has made things a lot more civilized in the wood shop. So it's just an example. I'm not putting these numbers out here to brag or anything. It's just I've learned a lot making this process and improving on it over many years. I've probably made 5,000 of these frames over the course of like almost 15 years now. So I've had plenty of practice doing this. I used to make them out of solid wood before I made them out of plywood. So I've tried a whole bunch of different methods, and I'm pretty happy with how this works now. So I hope this video can be viewed as educational. I'm not trying to brag about how much money I make, although if I had work like this all the time I'd probably have something to brag about. But it is possible for a small shop to make a decent wage. So I would give advice to anybody looking to start a custom woodworking business to consider trying to find and get some kind of low-end bread and butter production work like this, because I learned over doing this for many years that it tends to be more profitable than the high-end work and easier to control and maintain those profit margins. I've never been able to get close to $100 an hour doing any kind of high-end job, and that is just because of the customization, and every piece of furniture is different, so there's setup in between jobs, and the finish work tends to be very finicky, and there's risk factors associated with high-end work, and there's ups and downs in the markets. There's a long list of problems with doing high-end, and my shop wouldn't have survived this long without doing this type of low-end work to supplement. So just a thought to consider, and I hope this video can be helpful, and wish I could do more of this type of work, but really once or twice a year is enough for me, just so I don't wear out my joints, because it definitely imposes some wear and tear on my body. But if I had to, I could train somebody and do this work all the time, but it's not really what I want to do, so I'm happy with doing it just a couple times a year. So a while back, just to compare, I did a few large custom canvas stretcher frames, and I calculated a profit rate of $30 an hour, which barely even pays for the shop. So that just goes to show you the difference of doing something in a custom, one-of-a-kind setting as opposed to a production setting. It can be a completely different result in terms of the economics. Also, I have another channel where I'm posting content. It's called Out of the Woodwork, and I made a video about delivering these frames. It's mostly just a driving video, and I took some footage of New Paltz and talked about where I used to live down there. But check it out if you want. I'm going to be posting videos there that are not directly related to woodworking, just extra stuff. So thanks, and have a great day.